What I often hear and read in the comments is, when I speak about the tribulation period, is that the tribulation period is not 7 years. And then you get other theories. The days that it calculates, 7 years is 2,520 days, that these are actually years. That's one thing, or it's 3.5 years and not 7, and then there are all kinds of other variations. Is it 7 years or is it not? That's the question, and I just want to give you some thoughts on that. So in the book of Jeremiah, it is called Jacob's trouble. Jacob's trouble. Now, Jacob is of course Israel, so it's about Israel, and indeed one of the main purposes of the tribulation period is to deal with the remnant of Israel, to fulfill basically the promise that God made to Israel through Abraham. So Jacob's trouble also refers, of course, to Jacob. What was Jacob's, Jacob is the person, what was his trouble? We know this from Genesis 29, when he came to his uncle Laban. He saw Rachel, and the moment he saw Rachel, he was in love. He wanted her, and so he agreed with Laban that he would work for him, and in return he would then get Rachel as a bride. But he ended up with Leah, and then Laban says to Jacob, you have to fulfill also her week, and then you will have her. And he had to work another 7 years. Now, I've covered this in other videos, so I want to keep this short, but Rachel is a type of the Jewish bride, and Leah of the Gentile bride. Jacob is here a type of Jesus in this story, Jesus who came for the children of Israel, but it ended up to be the salvation for the Gentiles at large, of course, when I'm speaking about individual persons. And after the 7 years, after the week has been fulfilled, also Rachel, also this, if you will, Jewish bride will be added to the church, to the bride. So again, the words that Laban says is, fulfill her week, and the word of week here is in Hebrew is Shavua. I will write it down. That is Shavua. So Shin Beth Vav Ayin, and it means a 7. So we translate it with a week, because a week, as we know it, is 7 days. But it's a 7 in general. It can be any period of 7. So it can be 7 days, but it can also be 7 years. And we find this period of 7 years, of course, many times throughout the Bible. And in Hebrew they call this a Shemitah, a period of 7 years. And the 7th year is then a Shabbatic year, a year of rest. And of course, when this is fulfilled 7 times, 7 times 7, then the 49, then the 50th year is a Jubilee. You can find it in Leviticus 25. So 7 is also the number of completion. Think of the creation week. 6 days God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it, and on the 7th day he rested. That's a complete week. And everything basically is based on that. So how does this relate to the tribulation period? Tribulation period, again, Jacob's trouble. So if Jacob's trouble was to fulfill the week for Rachel, which was 7 years, then we could say probably the tribulation period for greater Jacob, for Israel, is also 7 years. But that's conjecture, of course. There's more to it. The most famous prophecy in the Old Testament, of course, is that from Daniel 9, verse 27, where he speaks about the week. Again, it's the word Shavua, 7, and in the midst of the week, the abomination of desolation takes place. We call this week also Daniel's 70th week, because he prophesies in total a period of 70 weeks, 70 periods of 7. Now all the other 69 have been fulfilled, so that makes it easy. We can look back in history and see how they have been fulfilled. These 69 weeks were weeks of years. And so if the 69 were weeks of years, then it's reasonable to say that the 70th will also be a week of years, 7 years. And nothing else. And so in the midst of this, the abomination of desolation will take place, Daniel 9:27 says. So there is a period of 3.5 years preceding it, and then 3.5 years after it. How can we know for sure that this is speaking about 7 years in total, meaning 2 periods of 3.5 years? Well, that is the multitude of references that we have. Because there are places where it speaks about a year, and then we have to replace that with 1,000 or a day, and we have to replace it with 1,000 years. But here this does not work. Especially because Daniel is quoted by Jesus in Matthew 24, and then it is obviously we read about the fulfillment in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is a book of sevens, and I give there in our video series about this, in the introduction, I give a host of examples of sevens in the Bible and how this all relates to each other. But we read in particular in the central 3 chapters of the book of Revelation, chapter 11, 12 and 13, which are sort of umbrella chapters. They cover the whole period of 7 years, whereas the other chapters take parts of it. But these chapters make it clear what we speak about. In Revelation 11, it speaks about the 2 witnesses that prophesy for, it says, 1260 days. That's the until the Antichrist or the beast kills them. So, and that we know that from the context is in the midst of the tribulation, also when the abomination of desolation takes place. So, 1260 days it says here. It doesn't say 3.5 years, now it gives it in days. 1260 days is 3.5 years. And then in Revelation 12, it speaks about the woman being the remnant of Israel, fleeing to a safe place in the desert for, it says, a time, times and half a time. So that is a year, 2 years and half a year. So we have now 2 different references that speak about the same duration of 3.5 years. The first is about the first half, and then Revelation 11 speaks about the first half, Revelation 12 about the second half. So, then we go to Revelation 13. There it speaks about the abomination of desolation that takes place, and that from that moment on the Antichrist reigns. He has gotten the authority to overcome the saints. How long? It says there 42 months. And so that's the third reference to this period. That's also the second half, obviously, but now in months. So we have it in days, in years, and in months. I will quickly write that down. So the week, the Shavuot that Daniel speaks about, is made up of 2 halves, and we have 3 different references in 3 consecutive chapters of the book of Revelation that give different ways to define this duration. And because it's so explicit, we can know for sure that this speaks about 2 times 3.5 years, or 7 years in total. Daniel gives then additional information. Daniel 12, it speaks about a period of 1290 days, and then of 1335 days. We've explained this also in other videos. I will leave some links. So this again makes it only more clear that we speak about a total of 2,520 days or 7 years. Daniel 8 speaks even about 2,300 years from the moment that the sacrifices start until the cleansing of the temple. So we have all this. So it's clear. The period is 7 years, but it is divided into 2 periods of 3.5 years. In Matthew 24 verse verse 21, Jesus speaks of the great tribulation. He speaks of the abomination of desolation, of which Daniel spoke, and then he says then there will be a great tribulation. That pertains to the second half. That's when the reign of the Antichrist really takes off, and the mark of the beast is imposed. So that's the same 42 months that Book of Revelation chapter 13 speaks of. So that's great tribulation. So we find there all of a sudden, in the English version at least, the word great tribulation. And so some speak all the time about great tribulation, and great tribulation is 3.5 years, and that is the tribulation period. And it comes from there. But since the English translation uses this word great tribulation, it's not now all of a sudden a definition of the entire tribulation period. Because that would mean that the first 3.5 years do not belong to the tribulation period. Well, that's how you will define tribulation. But if you think of that, in the first 3.5 years, half of the global population will die because of wars and pestilences and famine and natural disasters and the worst things that come upon the earth, then I would certainly call that also tribulation period. And I understand that there's a difference between the first and the second half, and that's what this also speaks about, of course. But it's all part of that week, of that Shavua. So we have basically 3 terms, and we should not mix them up. We have tribulation in general, and Jesus says, in the world you will find tribulation. So we see that in history, we see it even today. Christians are persecuted in many places. They are discriminated. They find tribulation. They find trouble in this world. And Jesus said, they hated me first, so they will hate you too. This is to be expected. That's tribulation in general. That is from the first Christian on until the last one. This will be the case. Now then, there is the tribulation period, which is Jacob's trouble, or Daniel's 70th week, Shavua. That is 7 years. And then there is the Great Tribulation, which is the second half of these 7 years. Personally, I try to not use this term Great Tribulation because it's confusing. But if we define it correctly, it's the second half of the 7 years. The total tribulation period of 7 years, they will begin with the rapture. In the midst sits the abomination of desolation. And the remnant there is saved and set apart. The witnesses are killed. That's what we find in these 3 chapters in the middle of the book of Revelation. And at the end of the 7 years, there is the second coming of Jesus. That's Revelation chapter 19. So it's like book supports the rapture and the second coming, and in between you have these all these events in the 7 years that are described in the book of Revelation. So that is my take on it. That is what Scripture says, and there can be said much more about it, and we did so in many videos, and I will leave the link to several because we made a video series about Matthew 24. Very in-depth and very extensive video series about the book of Revelation, where we go into all these things, and I touch on it in many other videos as well. But I just wanted to address this quickly because I get so many remarks about this, and people are confused or not in the know about this. So I hope this is beneficial to you and edifying, and I thank you for listening and watching, and God bless you.